They found me 3 days later, standing in the secret basement of my dead grandmother's mansion, holding documents that would destroy my entire family. But let me start from the beginning, because what they did to Grandma Agatha will make your blood boil. My name is Iris Hartwell, and I was the only one who cared. While my father Victor and my uncles Edmund and Charles lived their fancy lives in Boston's Back Bay, driving their Mercedes and attending charity galas they didn't believe in, I drove 2 hours every weekend to Salem, Massachusetts. Rain, or shine, through blizzards and heat waves. I visited the old mansion where my 89-year-old grandmother lived alone, forgotten and slowly dying. The house stood like a Gothic monument on Chestnut Street, its Victorian bones still proud despite decades of neglect. But inside, despite the creaking floors and drafty windows, Grandma Agatha would light up when she saw me park my beat-up Honda in the circular driveway. "My dear Iris," she would whisper, "you're the only one who remembers I'm still alive." Her voice carried the weight of decades of abandonment. But her eyes, those sharp blue eyes that had seen nearly a century of joy and heartbreak still, sparkled with intelligence and mischief when I brought her stories from the outside world. My family called me crazy for wasting my weekends with her. "She's just a bitter old woman," my father would say, barely looking up from his Wall Street Journal. "Stop throwing your life away on someone who will be dead soon anyway. You should be networking, building a career, finding a husband with prospects." But they didn't see how her face transformed when I brought her flowers, daffodils in spring, roses in summer, chrysanthemums in fall. They didn't know how she saved old photo albums just to show me family history, pointing at faded faces with stories that made the past come alive. They never witnessed how she still cooked my favorite snickerdoodle cookies even though her arthritis made kneading dough an agony that left her hands swollen for days. 3 months ago, everything changed. I found her collapsed in the kitchen on a gray October morning, her face blue, barely breathing. I called 911 with shaking fingers, rode in the ambulance holding her cold hand, sat by her hospital bed as machines beeped their electronic lullabies around her small form. "Promise me something," she whispered on her last night, her voice so weak I had to lean close enough to feel her breath on my ear. "Promise you'll take care of what's mine." "They don't deserve it, Iris. Only you do. Only you ever saw me as more than a burden to be managed." I promised. I had no idea what she meant, but I would have promised her anything to bring peace to those final moments. She died the next morning at sunrise. I was the only one there, holding her hand as her spirit slipped away like morning mist. The funeral was a performance that would have made Shakespeare weep with its tragic irony. My father and uncles showed up in expensive black suits they'd probably bought specifically for the occasion, shaking hands with neighbors they'd never bothered to meet, pretending to grieve for a woman they'd ignored for decades. "Such a tragedy," Uncle Edmund announced loudly to anyone within earshot, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We'll miss her wisdom and guidance." So much, I wanted to scream. These men hadn't visited her once in 5 years. They'd sent generic Christmas cards signed by their secretaries and forgotten her birthday more times than they remembered it. 2 weeks later, we sat in Laird Tobias Green's office for the will reading. My father drummed his manicured fingers on the conference table, already counting his inheritance in his head. I could practically see the dollar signs reflected in his cold gray eyes. "The house is old, but the land is worth something," Uncle Charles whispered to Edmund, not bothering to lower his voice. "We can sell it to developers and split the money 3 ways. Maybe get enough to buy that place in the Hamptons we've been eyeing." Mr. Green cleared his throat. He was a thin man with kind eyes, someone who'd known my grandmother for 30 years and had genuinely respected her sharp mind and generous heart. "The last will and testament of Agatha Ravenswood," he began, his voice carrying the weight of legal formality and personal grief. My father leaned forward like a vulture sensing carrion. My uncles smiled with the confidence of men who'd never been denied anything they wanted. "To my granddaughter Iris Hartwell, who alone among my family showed me love without expectation of reward, I leave my mansion at 1347 Chestnut Street, Salem, Massachusetts, along with all properties and assets in my name." The room went silent. Then my father exploded like a champagne cork under too much pressure. What? Victor slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. That's impossible. We're her sons. Her flesh and blood. She can't give everything to a 24-year-old girl who doesn't understand the value of money. Mr. Green held up his hand with the patience of someone who delivered difficult news before. There's a condition. My uncles relaxed visibly, their smiles returning like sun after a brief storm. Of course there is. Miss Hartwell must live alone in the mansion for exactly 30 days. If she leaves for more than 6 hours at any time, or if she fails to complete the full month, the inheritance goes to charity. All of it. The laughter that erupted from my family was cruel and loud enough to echo off the office walls. 30 days, Charles wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes. In that haunted old house, she won't last 2 nights. The place gives grown men nightmares. The heating system barely works, Victor added with gleeful malice. And it's October. She'd be back home crying and begging for forgiveness within a week. Grandma Agatha had been the smartest woman I knew. Sharp as a blade even at 89, she didn't do anything without a carefully considered reason. I accept, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. The laughter died like someone had cut the power. You're making a mistake, Iris, my father warned, his voice dropping to the threatening tone he'd used when I was a child who'd disappointed him. When you come running home, don't expect us to welcome you back with open arms. 3 days later, I stood alone in front of the mansion with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of determination. I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first: dust, mold, and something else. Something that made my skin crawl and the hair on my arms stand up. The floorboards creaked under my feet like old bones as I explored room after room. I spent my first night huddled under every blanket I could find in the living room, jumping at every sound the old house made as it settled around me. The house seemed alive, full of whispers and secrets that decades of silence hadn't been able to bury. On day 3, while dusting the library in a desperate attempt to make the mansion feel less like a mausoleum, I found the first hidden door. I was cleaning the built-in bookshelves, running my cloth over leather spines that hadn't been touched in years, when my elbow knocked against a loose volume. The complete works of Edgar Allan Poe, how perfectly fitting for this gothic nightmare. I was living. The book tilted backward with a soft click, and suddenly the entire bookshelf swung inward like something from an old movie about secret passages and buried treasure. Behind it was a narrow stone staircase leading down into complete darkness that seemed to swallow light and sound. My phone's flashlight revealed a hidden basement I never knew existed in all my years of visiting. The air was thick and cold, heavy with secrets that had been buried for decades. And there, in the far corner, was an old wooden desk covered in papers, as if someone had been working there recently. What I found there shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Letters, dozens of them, tied with faded pink ribbon that crumbled at my touch like autumn leaves. The first one I opened with trembling fingers made me gasp so loudly the sound echoed off the stone walls like a ghost's cry. My dearest Agatha, it began in elegant handwriting that spoke of education and refinement. I fear your sons suspect our marriage. Edmund came to my shop today asking strange questions about my business, my will, my future plans. Charles has been watching my house from across the street at odd hours. I've hidden our marriage certificate and all the important documents where they'll never find them. If something happens to me, remember you are my legal wife. Everything I own belongs to you now. It was signed your devoted husband, Julian Ashworth, and dated May 10th, 1982. My grandmother had been secretly married. For all those years of visiting her, listening to her stories, holding her hand through lonely afternoons, she'd never mentioned a husband named Julian. I kept reading with growing horror and fascination, my heart pounding as the pieces of a 40-year-old puzzle fell into place. The letters told a love story that had turned into a nightmare. Julian Ashworth was a successful businessman who'd owned several properties around Salem and Boston. He'd met my widowed grandmother at a church social and fallen deeply in love with her intelligence, her kindness, her strength. Your beauty isn't just in your face, one letter said, the ink faded but the emotion still vivid. It's in your kindness, your strength, the way you see goodness in everyone even when they don't deserve it. I never believed in soulmates until I met you, Agatha. Now I can't imagine existing without you. They dated secretly for 2 years because my father and uncles had made it clear. They disapproved of their mother finding love again. They want control, Julian wrote in increasingly urgent letters. They think if you remain alone and dependent, they'll inherit everything when you pass. But I won't let them manipulate you, my darling. You deserve happiness. The letters grew more desperate as time passed. Julian described suspicious incidents, his car brakes failing after they'd been working perfectly, severe food poisoning after family dinners he'd attended, break-ins where nothing was stolen but his office had been thoroughly searched. They're getting desperate, he wrote, his handwriting shaking with either fear or rage. Edmund cornered me at the bank today, demanding to know why I'd been asking about joint accounts. Charles has been spreading rumors about my business practices, trying to ruin my reputation with lies and insinuations. But I've taken precautions, my love. My lawyer Thomas Ashworth, my nephew, has copies of everything. Our marriage certificate, my will, all the property deeds. If anything happens to me, find him on Beacon Street. The last letter was different. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, written by a man who knew he was dying. My beloved Agatha, it began, and I had to wipe tears from my eyes to continue reading. I'm writing this from what I fear is my deathbed, and I don't have much time left. They've poisoned me, I'm certain of it. Edmund brought me coffee yesterday morning, insisting I drink it while he watched with those cold eyes. Within an hour, I could barely stand. My heart feels like it's being squeezed in a vice, and every breath is a struggle. The doctors say it's a massive heart attack, but I know better. I've never had heart problems in my life. Don't let them win, my love. Don't let them steal what we built together. The truth is hidden in our special place. You know where. Tell them nothing.
Trust.
No one except Thomas. And remember that our love was real, even if they try to erase it from history. Your eternal husband, Julian. The letter was dated February 10th, 1983. According to the yellowed obituary I found in the same stack of papers, Julian Ashworth had died peacefully of natural causes. On February 18th, 1983, they had murdered him. My father and uncles had killed my grandmother's secret husband to prevent her from inheriting his fortune. And for 40 years she'd lived with that knowledge, keeping quiet, playing the role of the forgotten old woman while she planned her ultimate revenge. But there was so much more hidden in that basement than I could have imagined. In a metal strongbox that took me 20 minutes to pry open, I found property deeds that made my hands shake so violently I could barely read them. Julian hadn't just been wealthy, he'd been incredibly, unimaginably wealthy. 3 apartment buildings in downtown Boston, a shopping center in Cambridge, waterfront property in Cape Cod worth millions, stock certificates and bonds that, even accounting for 40 years of inflation, represented a fortune. And because Agatha was his legal wife, everything had legally belonged to her, which meant it all belonged to me now. My family hadn't just ignored a lonely old woman living on social security in a crumbling house. They'd ignored a multimillionaire who'd been testing them for 40 years, waiting to see if any of them would show her genuine love and kindness. I'd passed the test. They failed it spectacularly. The next few weeks were a blur of discoveries that painted an increasingly dark picture of my family's greed and heartless manipulation. I found more hidden rooms behind false walls. Julian's old office, perfectly preserved as if waiting for his return. A safe containing jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Photo albums showing my grandmother and Julian's happy life together before my family destroyed it with their greed. While exploring the mansion, Iris discovered her grandmother's hidden diary, a heartbreaking record of 40 years of manipulation and theft by her own sons. But the most heartbreaking entries were about me. Iris helped me repair the kitchen faucet today. She could have been anywhere on a beautiful Saturday with friends, on dates, building her own life. But she chose to spend it with me on her. Hands and knees under my sink, determined to fix what was broken. Julian would have loved her spirit. I've decided to leave everything to Iris, not because she's expecting it. She never asks for anything except my company. Not because she needs it, though God knows her family has never supported her dreams. But because she's the only one who sees me as a person instead of a burden to be endured or a bank account to be drained. She deserves to know the truth about Julian. She deserves justice for both of us. The final entry was dated just 1 week before her heart attack, and reading it made me cry for hours. I've prepared everything for Iris. The basement holds all the proof she needs to destroy those who destroyed Julian. The hidden rooms contain his treasures, not just money, but memories, photographs, the life we should have had together. Detective Morrison at Salem Police has been waiting 40 years for evidence of Julian's murder. He was a young officer then, and he never believed the natural death story. If I don't survive much longer, at least I'll die knowing the truth will finally come out. My sweet Iris will succeed where I failed. She make them pay for what they did to Julian, and what they've done to me all these years. Love always wins in the end. Sometimes it just takes 40 years to prove it. On day 15 of my stay in the mansion, I found the final piece of the puzzle. Hidden behind a loose brick in the basement wall was a manila envelope addressed to me, in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter that made me understand everything. My dearest Iris, it read, if you're reading this, you've been brave enough and smart enough to discover our family's darkest secrets. You've learned about Julian, the love of my life, the man your father and uncles murdered for money they never even got to steal. You've seen the proof of their decades of theft and manipulation. You know about the properties Julian left me, the wealth they never knew existed. You understand now why I made you promise to take care of what's mine. I couldn't fight them alone, my dear girl. I was too old, too tired, too broken by years of keeping Julian's murder secret while watching his killers pretend to love me. But you have the strength I lost long ago. You have the courage to seek justice. You have the pure love that Julian and I shared, the kind of love that never gives up. Take the evidence to Detective Morrison. He's Chief Morrison now, but he's been waiting his whole career for this moment. Take the property deeds to Thomas Ashworth Jr. on Beacon Street. He's Julian's great-nephew now. And he's been guarding family documents for decades, waiting for the day justice would finally come. Use the money wisely. Build the life you deserve. And remember that every day you spent with me, every flower you brought, every hand you held, it all mattered more than you'll ever know. You gave an old woman hope when she had none left. Your father and uncles will try to convince people that I was senile, that these documents are forgeries, that Julian never existed. Don't let them gaslight you. The truth is stronger than their lies, and love is stronger than greed. You are my revenge, Iris. You are justice with a beating heart. You are love winning over evil. Make them pay. Make them remember. Make them regret the day they chose money over family. I love you more than you'll ever know. Your devoted grandmother, Agatha Ravenswood Ashworth. I sat in that cold basement, surrounded by 40 years of hidden truth, and finally understood the magnitude of what I've been chosen to do. The remaining days of my 30-day stay passed in a blur of research, planning, and preparation. I photographed every document, every letter, every piece of evidence. I contacted Detective Morrison, who was indeed Chief Morrison now and still. Remembered the suspicious circumstances of Julian's death. I reached out to Thomas Ashworth Jr., who nearly cried when I told him I'd finally found his great-uncle's missing wife and the justice he'd died waiting for. Every night, I felt my grandmother's presence in the house, like she was guiding me, protecting me, making sure I found everything I needed to complete her 40-year plan. The house didn't feel scary anymore. It felt like home. On day 31, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. Ready to give up yet? My father's voice was smug, dripping with the satisfaction of a man who thought he'd won. We're having a family dinner tonight to celebrate getting the house back. You should come, we'll need someone to serve the food and clean up afterward. I'll be there, I said calmly, my heart steady with purpose. That evening I walked into the fancy restaurant where my family waited like vultures at a feast. They'd reserved a private dining room and invited extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone who'd heard about my failure to inherit Grandma's worthless house. Here she is, Uncle Charles announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Our brave little explorer. How was your month in the haunted mansion? See any ghosts? The table erupted in cruel laughter. My father raised his wineglass with theatrical flourish. To Iris, who learned that dreamers always come back to reality. More laughter. More cruel jokes about my stupidity for thinking I could handle living alone in a house that had defeated stronger people than me. I smiled and sat down calmly. Actually, I have some news to share. Did you find any treasure? Cousin Beth giggled, wine making her louder than usual. Maybe Grandma buried gold in the garden like a pirate. Something like that. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder, the same folder I'd shown Detective Morrison that morning. The same folder that had made him immediately call the district attorney and reopen a 40-year-old murder case. I opened it and spread the contents across the dinner table like cards in a game of truth or consequences. Marriage certificate between Agatha Ravenswood and Julian Ashworth. Property deeds worth $12 million. Bank statements showing decades of theft. Julian's final letter describing his murder in detail. Police reports that had been buried for 4 decades. The laughter died like someone had cut the power to their joy. What is this? My father's voice was barely a whisper, his face draining of color. This is proof that Grandma was secretly married to Julian Ashworth for 3 years before. You killed him, I said, my voice steady as steel. This is proof that you stole millions of dollars that belonged to her. And this is proof that she left everything, all $12 million, to the one person who actually loved her. Uncle Edmund's face turned gray as old paper. That's not possible. Mother never mentioned any husband. These documents are obviously fake. Detective Morrison is very interested in Julian's letter describing his poisoning. I continued, watching my family's world crumble in real time. Especially the part where he names you specifically, Edmund. Coffee, wasn't it? You insisted he drink it while you watched. The silence in that room was beautiful, broken only by the sound of forks dropping onto expensive china. You can't prove anything, Charles stammered, his arrogance finally cracking. That old woman was crazy in her final years. These documents could be forgeries, fabricated by someone trying to steal from us. I smiled with the confidence of someone holding royal flush. Julian's lawyer kept copies of everything. Thomas Ashworth Jr. still has his father's files in a safety deposit box that hasn't been opened in 40 years. The police have been waiting 4 decades for this evidence. My father stood up so fast his chair fell over with a crash. You ungrateful little witch. After everything we've done for you. We fed you, we clothed you, we gave you a family. You ignored me, I said simply, my voice cutting through his rage like truth through lies. Just like you ignored her. The only difference is, I'm not going to spend 40 years waiting for justice. I stood up and looked around the table at their shocked, terrified faces. The mansion will be renovated into a museum honoring Julian's memory. The apartment buildings will continue providing affordable housing like he wanted. And every penny you stole over the decades will be recovered through the courts. I picked up my purse and headed for the door, my heels clicking on marble floors that suddenly sounded like a funeral march for their greed. Oh, and Dad, Uncle Edmund, Uncle Charles? You'll be hearing from my lawyers tomorrow morning. And the police will be visiting you tonight. Enjoy your dinner, it might be your last as free men. As I walked out, I heard my father screaming threats that were just desperate words from men who'd finally been caught. 6 months later, I stood in the beautifully renovated mansion, now gleaming with fresh paint, modern heating, and the kind of loving care it hadn't seen in decades. The Julian Ashworth Museum of Local History was ready for its grand opening, a testament to love conquering greed and justice finally being served. Detective Morrison had found enough evidence to charge my father and uncles with fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The murder case was harder to prove after 40 years, but the civil suits would bankrupt them completely, just as they'd tried to do to my grandmother. My phone rang one final time. It was my father calling from jail where he was awaiting trial. "Iris, please." His voice was broken, stripped of all the arrogance that had defined him. "We're family, blood. You can't destroy your own family like this." I looked at Julian's portrait hanging in the main hallway, next to a photo of my grandmother as a young woman, radiant and full of hope. They looked happy together, the way love should look. "You're right, Dad," I said quietly. "I could never do this to family." "But you stopped being family the day you chose money over love. The day you decided that your mother was worth more dead than alive. The day you forgot that she was a person who deserved respect, care, and basic human dignity." I hung up and turned off my phone forever. Later that evening, I sat in the mansion's restored library, reading one of Julian's books by the light of a fire crackling in the fireplace. The house felt warm and alive now, full of light and hope instead of secrets and sadness. On the mantelpiece sat a photo of me and Grandma Agatha from my last visit. She was smiling, holding my hand, looking directly at the camera with eyes that sparkled with the secret knowledge that justice was coming. I'd kept my promise. I'd taken care of what was hers. And in return, she'd given me something far more valuable than money. She'd taught me that real power comes from showing up when no one else will, from caring when it costs you everything, from choosing love over greed even when the whole world tells you you're foolish. My family had collapsed, not because I destroyed them, but because they built their lives on lies, theft, and the murder of an innocent man. All I'd done was shine a light on the truth. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to the bedroom, that was now truly mine, I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for everything, for teaching me what love really means." And I swear I heard her voice whisper back, carried on the wind through windows that no longer rattled with loneliness. "Thank you for seeing me, dear one. Thank you for caring when no one else would." The mansion settled around me with a contented sigh, not haunted anymore. Not lonely, just home. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about living, while loving freely and making sure their victims are finally heard.